Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Welcome. My name is Devana Robity. I'm the program coordinator I'm the program director at the Schweinfurth Arts Center and a member of the SDA Events Committee, a membership nonprofit focused on contemporary fiber and textile art. And I'm also an artist. I create large-scale installations, including shibori drawings, and I dye with indigo that I raised myself. I am delighted to welcome you to this week's Textile Talk, Learn and Make with SDA Textile Talks. Webinars are brought to you by the International Quilt Museum, the Modern Quilt Guild, Quilt Alliance, San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, Studio Art Quilt Associates, and the Surface Design Association. So once again, thank you all for joining us. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping announcements. This is a webinar, so your screens and mics are not showing. We welcome questions and we'll answer them at the end of the artist presentations. Please submit them in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. Please notice that that's different from the chat. So if you want your question to be answered, it has to be in the Q&A box. We are honored to bring you free and inspiring Textile Talk programming. We respectfully ask you to be courteous as you engage with the speakers, moderators, and other participants. Your chat comments can be seen by everyone. Please use once again, I said use the Q&A for questions, and we'll be monitoring that. If you prefer not to see notifications from the chat, you can click on the chat button and toggle them on or off. So to introduce you to our workshop series, it's from markmaking to sculpture and from natural inks to the latest digital technologies. SDA presents an online workshop series starting in February 2023. Each workshop features nationally known instructors who apply fiber art and textile techniques in innovative and exciting ways. Instructors include Raquel Busa, Lorraine Glessner, NATALIE STOPKA, Janine Sherios, ERIN FLETCHER, and Joy Oud, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. So the workshops will be on 2 consecutive Saturdays, so from Saturday to Saturday, with 2-hour instruction sessions on those Saturdays, with a midweek meetup to troubleshoot, share progress, and to gather in community with the other participants. Your instructors will be present during the workshops. It makes it a great way to get to know them and your fellow participants. Registration is limited. And since the workshop series covers a 3-month span, meaning the workshops aren't all at the same time and they don't overlap, you can take several workshops at a reduced rate. So you can take them all if you want. All of the workshops will be recorded and it will be available to you until the end of 2023. It's really helpful to revisit your workshop information. And the series is open to members and non-members. You can register for a discount using this code, Textile Talk in all caps. So more information is on the SDA website. I highly encourage you guys to take advantage of the discount and go sign up today. So we're going to get started for our presentation. And our first presenter is Raquel Busa. Raquel. So Raquel has illustrated and published 3 coloring books, including LGBTQIA+ for kids. In 2020, Raquel completed her master's degree in business management and leadership. That same year, she officially established her business, Makina 37 LLC, an illustration group and online shop. She works in collage, sewing, and embroidery and other traditional mediums. So Raquel, would you please tell us a little bit about your workshop?
Yay, so thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my background as an illustrator and how that informs my background as an illustrator, and my work in textiles and how those two mediums inform each other in my work. So when I sew handmade objects, so when we sew handmade objects, we often tend to daydream or meditate and think about the intention behind the objects. So hand sewn objects are extraordinary because when they're given as a gift, the recipient sees the stitches and understands them as almost like a record of our love and labor. So in that vein, two of my most popular commissioned items are my dolls and collage portraits. And so I'm proud to say that most of my customers are parents from BIPOC and multicultural and blended families. They actively search for ways to celebrate the way their families look, and they want to see themselves represented in the world. And so they like these representations to be exceptional also in the way that they're made, and they want that process to be visible. So that being said, my most popular coloring book, the LGBTQIA+ for kids, in this book, I defined LGBT terms in a family-friendly way, but all of the illustrations are inspired by my handmade dolls. And some of the pages in the books are drawings of dolls that exist in real life. So I hope this explains how sewing informs my illustration and how illustration also informs my sewing. It goes hand in hand. So I create a lot of repeat patterns that I print on fabric and on paper. So I want, in my workshop, I will teach how to generate these repeat patterns using the illustration application Procreate. And so in the workshop, you'll learn how to export patterns so you can send them to print-on-demand companies. So repeat patterns are one of the most complicated designs to make in Procreate. And I'm not saying this to discourage anyone. I'm saying this because it is, that's what makes it perfect for a class in Procreate. It's a perfect project for a class, because you have to learn all of these essential functions in order to get to that final project. So in the first week of the course, we're going to collect all the elements that compose a pattern. So that's color, shape, forms, drawings, and then we're going, we'll focus on making the repeat patterns and a presentation print in the second week. So the class, the way I'd like to run my workshop is to include a demonstration in the beginning. And it's excellent that this demonstration is going to be recorded, because you'll get to revisit it and revisit it for that year. And then after the demonstration, there's time for hands-on practice during the class and questions. And in the end, you'll have 3 patterns and 1 presentation print that can be sent off to different companies or presented in a forum so that you can get your work licensed if that's what you'd like to do. So lastly, what you'll need for my workshop is an iPad, Apple Pencil, and your favorite drawing materials. You'll also get a handout with links to my favorite print-on-demand sites and a bunch of other helpful sites that will help you in your journey. So that's the course.
Thank you so much, Raquel. That sounds amazing. So if you have any questions about Raquel's workshop, please put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. Our next presenter is going to be Lorraine Glessner. Lorraine is a former assistant professor of Tyler School of Art and a workshop instructor and an award-winning artist. She has a diverse art background with skills that include painting, sculpture, photography, digital imaging. Her work is exhibited locally and nationally in galleries, museums, craft centers, everywhere. We're so excited to welcome Lorraine. Lorraine, can you tell us a little bit about your workshop?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. It's so exciting. I want to talk about where I got interested in marks and mark making. And that was in graduate school 20 years ago, when I took a graduate drawing class. It was called graduate drawing. I mean, not very creative in the title, but it's called graduate drawing. And because that word drawing was in the title, I was terrified to take it, but it came highly recommended to me, so I did it. I didn't think I could draw, but I quickly learned that through the class and through the expertise of that professor that drawings are just a series of marks, and I could make marks. I just couldn't draw, right? Those two don't coincide. So I realized that it's just a series of marks. And when I had that sort of realization, it was an aha moment. It just opened up doors for me. The trajectory of my work changed. My life sincerely changed at that point. And it's probably such a simple thing to hear it and to say it. It's a simple thing that drawings are just a series of marks, but it was an aha moment, and my work did change, and the approach to my work changed. And as soon as I got out of graduate school and started teaching, I wanted to share this aha moment in a class. So I designed this class quickly after graduating, and it's been going strong. It's one of my favorite classes to teach, and I teach parts of it in every class that I teach, even though it might not be a mark making class. So with that said, no matter what discipline you come from, whether you're fibers, ceramics, a painter, everything you do starts with the mark of the hand. And I feel that every artist should have a drawing practice as part of making their work. And also I use the word drawing and mark making interchangeably. Okay, I don't, so don't get nervous. And when you hear drawing, people get nervous when you hear that word. So it all starts with the mark of the hand, and I feel that everyone should have that drawing practice. I encourage all of my students to draw 5 to 15 minutes a day, whether they're in the studio or not. And I do the same. 5 to 15 minutes a day will change your life. And when I suggest this to people, they look really terrified. I have to have a drawing practice. Oh my gosh. No, it's not that. It's just making marks. So in this workshop, I do try to take that fear out of that word and out of that practice by employing the use of tactile, simple materials like making marks with soot, making marks with incense, stitch in a way that's not perfect necessarily, rust staining, eco staining, all of these sort of accidental or non-controllable ways in which to make a mark, to take your fear out. When that fear is gone, when that control is gone, the creative heart and your mind work together, and that's when magic happens. So after we make these marks, then we're going to talk about responding to the marks made by, and I talk about concepts of repetition, layering, process in your response to your marks. And it's through the response that students begin to develop their own unique voice, and their daily drawing practice begins at that point. So most of the exercises in the workshop are geared toward taking fear out of mark making. We do a lot of blind mark making, or making marks with your non-dominant hand, responding to someone else's mark, responding to a mark that, you know, like throwing something or running over a piece of paper with your car. That's a mark, and you respond to that. Plus a whole lot of timing with exercises. When you time yourself to do something, it takes the control out, takes the thought out of it, and you just respond. It's very freeing. So constraints, in other words, can be very freeing, and that's another aha moment that I had. So I guarantee that any artist, I guarantee this, when you take this class and you start to implement some of the things that you do for 5 to 15 minutes a day, you will watch your work grow exponentially. Your artistic voice becomes more clear, your body of work becomes more cohesive, and your approach to your work will become more confident, definitely. So I have, let's see, 397 witnesses right here to hold me to that guarantee, and I do guarantee that you will change your work when you take this class.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Yeah, so once again, make sure you put your question in the Q&A for Lorraine, and we'll get to that at the end. Our next presenter is NATALIE STOPKA. She's an artist and educator who works in collaborations with materials and forces in the natural world. Her drawings and prints incorporate plant dyes and natural pigments, which provide a seasonally evolving vocabulary of texture and color. NATALIE's freelance studio and dye garden is located in Yonkers, New York, and she's a graduate of Rhode Island School of Design and a MFA candidate at the University of Mexico. Welcome, NATALIE. Tell us about your workshop.
Thank you so much. Hello, all. So I work with foraged plants and pigments, as well as botanical colorants grown in my garden here in New York. And I really love to recreate historical recipes and develop new ones in an alchemical studio process of collaboration with the natural world. Here are some of my experimental printmaking and paintings, and they really imagine the geology underneath my garden, which is replete with the minerals which feed the plants, which produce the colors through the wonder of phytochemistry. So I love to work with these natural colorants because each of them is enmeshed in a material culture and history. Humans have been pursuing gorgeous colors to express ourselves and our beliefs for over 100,000 years. We have an enormous heritage across cultures and around the world, just striving to find, extract, purify, stabilize, and utilize color. In this ink making course, we are going to be looking at 3 different styles of ink made from natural materials and inspired by historical artisanry. We'll be studying a pigmented ink, as well as a dye-based ink, and what's called a ferrogallic ink. And I'm not just going to share my recipes for these inks with participants, but we'll discuss what purpose each ingredient serves. I'm not a chemist, nor do you need to be a chemist to enjoy this class, but I always strive to answer that question: what is the function of this ingredient and how can I tinker with it? So from this springboard of foundational recipes, participants will then have the understanding to explore any other colors they wish beyond my suggestions in the class materials list. It's really an invitation to connect with the sources of our materials. For me, that comes through the gardening, foraging, and also utilizing waste stream colorants. So things like onion skins or eggshells, which would otherwise just be composted. And when we work with handmade and natural artist materials, we're inviting not just those new colors, but also the new textures, scents, and capabilities into our studio process. To me, ink is not just a writing or drawing fluid that comes in any color of the rainbow. Each color has an array of intriguing characteristics like granularity, opacity, translucency, flow, staining, oxidization. Each of these are exciting new elements to work with, to collaborate with in creating art. Each plant source actually contains up to 20 different colorant compounds. So the inks that we make from plants have a lot of personality. And each one also has a backstory, which gives us as artists the chance to connect our work across space and time to the places and the people from which each color comes. Thank you.
Thank you, NATALIE. Wonderful. Once again, don't forget to ask a question in our Q&A. If you're in the chat, it's a bit more difficult for us to go through those, so please ask it in the Q&A section. Our next presenter is Janine Cherios. Janine works Her work includes installation, fibers, photography, and sculptural works. She is best known for her intricately crafted leaves, stitched entirely with human hair. She has exhibited widely, both nationally and internationally, and featured in numerous publications. I'm not going to name them all, but a lot. And she's visiting lecture in the fibers department at Massachusetts College of Art and Design in Boston. So Janine, it's wonderful to have you with us today. Tell us a bit about your workshop.
Well, hello, and thank you so much for inviting me to share a little bit about my work and my teaching. So yeah, this series that I have been exploring involves really recreating the vascular structure of leaves using hair. And so I was really interested in seeing if I could figure out a way to make this happen. And what I ended up doing was using a water-soluble backing called solvay, and I would thread each hair on a needle and then stitch into the solvay and tie a little knot where the hairs intersect. So then eventually, when I dissolve the backing, the entire leaf holds its form. So involved in my work is this interest in really building up a structure stitch by stitch, almost on a cellular level. And I'm really interested in the idea of open work and work that's based on netting and lace. So for my workshop for SDA, I'm excited to be teaching knotless netting. And so for this workshop, it's such a beautiful ancient technique that's a structure built up really using only loops, which is pretty incredible. And so for the workshop, we'll be exploring ways to use this technique to both reveal and conceal form. You can use it to encase a form as a structure or a skin, adding another layer of meaning. Maybe it's used to highlight openings within a structure or as a mold around another object. During the pandemic, when everything went online, I had the opportunity to teach a fiber structures course for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And while I was teaching online, I found that the format actually lent itself really well to teaching this technique. So here are examples of images from a couple of my students. In the top middle was a piece by Savannah Nielsen, who was creating a structure using netting to create the form itself. And then on the right is a piece by Ellie Taubner, where she's experimenting with layering other techniques and other materials, and the knotless netting becomes a way, sort of an act of mending. So there are an incredible amount of artistic possibilities within this technique, and I'm really excited to be teaching this workshop and just to help you develop your own voice and use this technique in a way that that builds upon the work that you're interested in doing. So thank you again for inviting me, and I hope to see some of you in the workshop.
Thank you, Janine. Our final presenter is ERIN FLETCHER. She's the owner of Herringbonebinde in Austin. Her work is regularly exhibited throughout the US and abroad. It's been collected by many different institutions, both public and private. She first discovered her love for bookbinding while studying at the School of Art Institute of Chicago. This experience ultimately brought her to study bookbinding at the North Bennett Street School in Boston, where she graduated in 2012. She regularly teaches book art workshops online and through various institutions across the country. ERIN, tell us a little bit about your workshop.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today and to be a part of this workshop series. So I'm a bookbinder, and the style of binding that I create, whether it's for instruction, exhibit, or commission, really ranges from simple forms to more complex forms. But I'm always using my education, my training as a bookbinder and centuries of technique and innovation into consideration as I'm making books. I will say, though, my love of making and craft actually began with embroidery as a child. So even though I fell in love with bookbinding later in life, embroidery found its way into my creative process. So the pieces on the screen are kind of those more complex structures I mentioned, and these are referred to as design embroidered bindings. All of these are full leather bindings that have been embellished with both traditional bookbinding and embroidery techniques. And the designs that I've created for these bindings are an expression of the text that they are bound around. And I do this type of work for collectors, on commission, and for exhibit. So the image on the left is a binding titled Stuart Williams, His World and His Art by William Corbett. And the text is a biography of the artist Stuart Williams, who created these really incredibly colorful and complex landscapes that often had animals and people with these big, vibrant personalities. Williams mainly worked with marker on paper. So in my own design, I wanted to evoke his aesthetic through my own methods and materials. So this binding is covered in an undyed calf skin that is hand painted with gouache. And there are leather onlays that are hand dyed and embroidered. The orange spots that you see on the tree are laser cut paper sequins that have been tacked onto the surface. The two images on the right are also full leather embroidered bindings. The one on the top is using some similar techniques, onlays made out of layers of handmade paper and goatskin and buffalo, embroidery used to embellish those further and to add the title to the front cover of the book. The image on the bottom is pieces of cotton scraps that have been dyed with natural materials that are appliqued to the leather surface with embroidery floss, also dyed with natural materials. And I just want to shout out my fellow presenter, NATALIE STOPKA, because she provided me with the scrap pieces of cotton. So in the workshop that I'm going to be teaching, we're going to be focusing on one of those more simple structures that I use in my practice. And this is called the two-mouche structure, and we're going to be embellishing it with embroidery. My goal here is to showcase how these two disciplines really complement each other. So the two-mouche is actually a recently developed structure by French binder Ben Elbel, and the name loosely translates to flypaper. It's a really quirky name that describes a point of the making process where the covers kind of resemble flypaper. So nothing related to the actual structure of the book. But this workshop is really great for anyone who is been curious about bookbinding, maybe hasn't jumped into it yet, but also for anyone who has had some bookbinding experience, but you just want to continue to develop those skills. I've chosen the two-mouche to teach because it's very simple to make. Students will be receiving a kit of materials, but we will be constructing the book from scratch. So that'll be including sewing the text block by hand, doing some details on the spine, and then folding and constructing the covers. The covers themselves are made up of multiple layers, and it creates a really beautiful, rigid, strong cover. And these layers open up opportunities for decoration. And as I mentioned before, we'll be focusing on embroidery. So I will show my technique of how I transfer a design into a paper cover. And it's the same technique I used on the previous images in my leather covers. Students will also receive a handout on how to create this structure again on their own time. And it's a really nice book for sketching in. It opens nice and flat, but I think it also opens up opportunities for people who want to explore artist books. So that's my workshop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. And unfortunately, Joy could not join us today, but to give you a little brief summary of what she's doing, Joy is a mixed media artist and designer. She's the American-born child of Nigerian immigrants. She explores the concept of duality in her artwork. She earned her BFA in fashion design from the University of North Texas. And then after working in the fashion industry, she earned an MFA and fiber arts from the University of North Texas. She's been included in a numerous amount of national shows, and she was featured at Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. She teaches fiber art-based workshops nationally, and we're really excited to have her teaching for us. In her workshop, it's called Personalized Surfaces with Joy Oud. It's a targeted survey of surface design techniques that explore methods to transform plain fabric with uniquely personalized surfaces. You build on existing surface layers with embroidery and applique. Reverse applique will take us below the surface, where we experiment and subtly reveal pattern and image through deliberate multi-layering stitches. It's a great introduction to textile beginners and will provide advanced students with fresh approaches to surface manipulation. So perfect. And now from here, we're going to go to, I want you all to go to surfacedesign.org workshops. Sign up as soon as you can. We did have a question, and it popped up in chat and it came back up on our Q&A about where to find these workshops and how to find out pricing without logging in. So what you do is you follow this link, surfacedesign.org/workshops, and there'll be a workshop description. So you scroll past that and you see a paragraph about the pricing, as well as the format, recordings, and an email address of who to contact for any other questions regarding registration and that sort of thing. So please go ahead and sign up today. And I'm going to open up some more of our questions for the artists, and feel free to add questions to the chat while we're going. If we could get our presenters all back together here. If you guys don't mind turning on your cameras. Thank you. Perfect. Okay. So let's see. I think one of the first questions that were coming up were for Raquel, and several people asked a different version of this, but one of them was if you have an Air book but not an iPad, does that prevent you from using the class?
So yes. Unfortunately, you need an iPad in order to take the class. Procreate only works, it's only made for the iPad, but you can use any generation iPad as long as you have a stylist. I recommend using the Apple Pencil for the class because Procreate uses the tilt and the pressure sensitivity of the Apple Pencil. But you can use the stylus and then work your way up to getting the Apple Pencil. There are tons of websites where you can get refurbished iPads for maybe like $100, $150, like that. So you can find inexpensive ones for now, and then invest in the new versions later on.
And I'm assuming that means that you can't use any other software other than Procreate for this class, that you'll be solely using Procreate.
That's correct. So yes, we're going to be going through all the essential functions of Procreate. So everything from how to create palettes to how to use their brushes and so on. It's very Procreate specific. Yes, it's just a lot of like little intricate differences between one program to the next. And we're going to be focusing on Procreates.
Great. And the next couple of questions are for Lorraine. One says, I'm mainly a fiber artist, and does this translate to fiber? And the other ones is this mainly sort of getting at the same thing? Is it mainly a mark making drawing class? What tools are needed for the class? Can you unmute?
I always forget to do that. Excuse me. Yeah. Okay. So the first question, you're mainly a fiber artist. Well, as I said, yeah, this class is for anybody. Anybody who makes art makes a mark. And you can improve your art. If you take this class, you'll approach your art differently. if you take this class, whether you work in textiles or any kind of anything, ceramics, sculpture, blacksmithing, I mean, anything, you can take this class and you'll learn something about your work, because it's all about you. It basically is all about you, and it's about you first making a mark and then responding to it. And that's where the true art comes in, is you bringing in your own feelings, your own mark, your own thoughts to what you're doing. So yeah, definitely would be good for textile people. I'm a textile person. That's where I started. That's why I was so afraid of taking the drawing class, because it was mostly painters and sculptors in that class in grad school. And I came from the fiber textile department. So I was like, I don't belong here. And it turned out that I really did. You know, I found my home there. If that makes any sense. So, and then the next one is, what tools do we need? Well, there is a list, and it is a little bit extensive. So I basically say to you, you can, yeah, there's a list of things that are needed. There's a list that are things that are recommended, an optional list, and then there's a kit that you can purchase that is comprised of all of those things. And I think that's listed on the page, or you can get it if you sign up. I can't remember how it works, but if needed, I can sort of recite those things. But basically, there are things you should have around your house. Things like you can get away with something as simple as a rock to make a mark. You can get, like I said, you can run over a piece of paper with your car to make a mark. Rust printing, go find some rusty things when you're walking your dog. Those kinds of things, really easy to get a hold of. The other things that we're going to be using to respond to those marks, it can be things like ink. And you can work on fabric, you can work on paper. So the more things you have that are on that list, the more you'll get out of the class, like anything. But it's really not that big of a deal that you run out and get every single thing on the list. So I hope that answered the question.
Perfect. Thank you. I have another question. Well, real quick, to clear up one thing I meant to mention, and the overall questions was, all of these workshops are online. They're via Zoom. Someone had asked that. Moving on, this is for Janine. I'm fascinated by creating leaves using solvay without knots. Does the solvay somehow cement the areas where the thread intersects? Your work is beautiful. That's what someone said.
Thank you. So that's a good question, because the solvay is really interesting, because when you dissolve it, it does have leave a little bit of a stickiness on the material, but I always rinse it enough to get that stickiness off, because I don't really want that on there. And it's really, so on the leaves, I am making knots, and those knots are what's holding everything in place. So it's really just that knot. There's no residue from the solvay that's actually acting as a glue or anything like that. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. The next one is for Erin. Erin, please tell me, does the gouache on leather need a sealer coat?
So the gouache that I used on that binding is actually acrylic gouache. So when it dries, the properties are more like acrylic paint. So I didn't have to add any kind of sealant to the leather. And you definitely, whenever you're painting on leather for bookbinding purposes, you want to use something that's not reactive to moisture, because you do add a lot of moisture with the adhesive to the backside of the leather. So I sort of misspoke when I just said gouache, but I used acrylic gouache on that binding.
Question for Natalie. What type of natural pigments are you pulling from your garden are you using natural pigments that you can grow in your own garden for this workshop, or what's your favorite one?
I am using plant-based dyes from the garden to make the dye-based inks. And for the pigmented inks, those are going to be I'm stipulating purchasing natural pigments for those. There is another process by which you can turn a botanical colorant into a pigment, but that's sort of a next level class. Yeah.
Okay. Another one for Raquel. I have an iPad Air 2. I looked up Apple Pencil. It says 3rd generation Air. I still can use the iPad Air, but not the pencil.
Yes, so if you have your iPad and you have your Procreate app, you don't have the Apple Pencil, you can still take the class. All you need is a stylist. And you can get those like even at like I know like Dwayne Reed or CBS has them like at the checkout, but those are really easy to get. You can use your finger. Again, you can still use the iPad without the Apple Pencil. Eventually, when you do get the Apple Pencil, there's certain little functions that will make your life a little easier. That's all, but you can still take the class if you don't have the pencil, the Apple Pencil.
All right. There's a few more technical questions. I'm going to encourage people, if you have technical questions about like the format of the workshops and things like, can you just view the recordings? I suggest going to the link surfacedesign.org/workshops and emailing events@surfacedesign.org to get those answers, because I'm not quite sure myself of the answer to that. So if you have any questions and you're having any trouble with registration, you can email Surface Design Association and they can help you with that. And I think that's it on all of our questions. I'm personally very excited. I want to take all of these workshops myself, and I just highly recommend everyone to go and sign up today because registration is limited and the spots will fill up quick. So sign up as soon as you can. And thank you, everyone, all of our presenters. It was wonderful to hear not only about your workshop, but to see you talk about your own work. That's very inspiring. And thank you to all of our sponsors and to SDA for hosting us. And the recording of this talk will be available on YouTube next week and on the SDA website. Textile Talks are brought to you free of charge. If you enjoy these weekly Textile Talks, please consider making a donation to our Textile Talk program. Next Wednesday, Textile Talks hosts Go Tell It, sponsored by the Quilt Alliance. Thank you all so much.